very small problems. Having it directly on a channel, you can't often hear exactly what the reverb's doing. Hello my beautiful music makers. So in today's video, I want to have a look at the new reverb plugin from iZotope Aurora. Let's give a little preface. A few years ago, they released something called Neoverb, and we're moving into like a smart reverb kind of era, right? And this is in that same guise, but a complete redesign, much like we've seen with the saturation tool that's come out recently. Today's video is sponsored by DistroKid, but my friend at iZotope did send me a key for Aurora so that I can check it out. It's got me thinking, like, it's a useful tool. It sounds good. We're going to dive into how it works in a second, but we've reached this point of almost like not a lack of innovation, but we're now solving really tiny problems with tools, and that's what this does. It's a great sounding reverb, and it addresses and fixes a very small problem, in my opinion anyway. And I want to dive into that, and let's have a look at it. So I've pulled up an old track here, an old mix, so that we can use that as an example. So we'll loop over. I'm hoping that's going to be the hook. That might not sound like a finished version. It is the mix, not the master. So if I remember rightly, on this we've got a vocal bus. We've actually got two. I can't fall to my knees and tell you I'm sorry. So what we'll do, we'll mute the wide aux, and I have a wide aux which does like some stereo separation and makes the vocal pan out but keeps it all mono compatible. And we'll just focus on the reverb, which is here. I can't fall to my knees. I'm going to replace my usual reverb, and in the middle here we'll bump in Aurora. Now I just want to note something, that my normal reverb, which was an RC24 in this case, and had an EQ after it which took out the low end. Nothing massive. So Aurora, which for some reason we can't resize, and we've been able to resize everything else recently, it's taken all the complexity side of the reverb and basically macro adjusting the things that you normally want to adjust. So we've put this on the bus with our wet dry send is now there. So we're going to want this straight at 100 because we're sending the signal in. So we want 100% of the reverb. So that's going to give us this. I can't fall to my knees and tell you I'm sorry. We're both to blame for this. So tell me, are you down with me? All right, so we got a pre-delay in our decay, so how quick the reverb starts happening, how long it lasts, right? You know, track at 174 BPM, like 10 seconds, 5 seconds, 20 seconds, they're all gonna work okay. Milliseconds, sorry. We'll have it at 0, so it's immediate in this case. If we bump the decay right up, it's ringing off like we're in an empty car park, right? So we want to dial that back. It's fast music, quite short. Somewhere around there is going to be fine, right? Now I had a wide aux which then separated the like reverb and spread it out and did some like phasing. We've got a width control in here, which is nice. Again, macro controls, big adjustments. Saves me a bus and doing that extra technique. So we can now just pump this out and get some extra spread. And it's nice. Again, macro control, one slider, rather than me having to do a wide aux, which is this here, and does that. Now getting some phasing issues, but you get the gist. So it saved me a chain of another 4 plugins and another bus with that kind of macro control built in on just one slider. Then got tonality. Tonality would usually be like your dampen control, really, bright or dark. So do we pump up the highs and leave them as loud as they were, or do we like dampen it off with dark? And I found this reverb, especially on horn, you got to dampen it off a bit. It's like bright. It's just too much. You got to dampen it off a bit. With that said though, when we talk about the other algorithms, of which we've got room, chamber, plate, ambience and cathedral, room sounds beautiful right out the bat. And it's by far for me the nicest sounding one, or most useful. And here I'd actually pump up my decay a bit now. Something nice we can do, if we've got this on a channel directly, we can solo out the reverb as well, which is useful. Now usually I would have this on the bus, like I do here. I can just solo the bus for that. But again, we're solving very small problems. Having it directly on a channel, you can't often hear exactly what the reverb's doing. And having it directly on the channel, as processing's become way more effective, allows you that ability to have multiple reverbs rather than just the 1, 2 or 3 you might usually have used, especially if you've got tracks which change the experience as they go along. So very useful for that, being able to then solo the reverb out. I can't fall to my knees and tell you I'm sorry. Yeah, it's a useful touch. Today's video is sponsored by DistroKid. They let me get my music out to all of the major distributors, and they do that at a price an independent artist can easily afford. If you're ready to get your music or beats out there and want to release an unlimited amount of music each year, check the link in the description below for a discount off of your first year of unlimited distribution with DistroKid. But since I'm on the bus anyway, we're not really going to get a difference. It is just the reverb. Now I've pumped the brightness up quite a bit here, and the reason I've done that is in the context of the mix, the reverb's now doing kind of some things to the vocal you wouldn't want it to do. When we turn it off, it actually sounds better now. It sticks out more in the mix when it's not there. And the reverb is ideally going to be given its own little like space in the mix, so the vocal sits in that space and you can always hear it and perceive it. The other problem that this would then solve would be basically what my EQ was doing here. In this case, I was just rolling out some low end, but sometimes you end up having to take out 2K, 1K, 3K a little bit. Sometimes a de-esser is a good way to go too on your reverb. Solving small problems, we've built that directly in, but they've done it in a really, really smart way. This slider will now pull out those areas that would be masking or conflicting, so allowing the vocal to continue to pop through and also have its reverb aspect. Like I said, solving small problems. I've pulled it all the way down and it's barely touching it in key moments. That's due to our sensitivity and our attack time. Now I said the attack time before for a track at this BPM, 20 milliseconds is pretty golden. That's relatively slow for the track, but as a vocal you don't want it to suddenly pull away. It sounds really unnatural. You need it to happen over a bit of time. And now the more we want to do this, we have to pump this sensitivity up. And now look at the detail and everything that's pulling through. So let's figure out a good borderline for that. And now the vocal has got the reverb there and is still cutting through in a much nicer way than it was without the unmask. It's really nice. Let's just solo the vocal out again, and I just want to have a listen through the other options. So chamber. I can't fall to my knees. Again, too bright, and I need to bring that tonality down for me. Something like that. This would be a really nice one to spread out though. That gives a really nice effect. I can't fall to my knees and tell you I'm sorry. We're both to blame for this. Tell me, are you down with me? Won't have to do too much. Now, there's one last thing that I do want to talk about. We looked at my EQ, which came after my reverb in this mix, and it rolled out all of the low end. I didn't want anything being generated in terms of a reverb in that space on the vocal. It wasn't there. Anything that was being produced was not necessary in the mix. And to do that in here, we've just got this little rollout here. Again, saving me an EQ, saving me a channel, fixing small problems. On the EQ itself, I rolled that out to around 400 Hertz with a nice slope, so we can bring that all the way up here. Look, we even get a representation of what's happening in here. So I didn't want any of the reverb from around this range here, really. Would I like to be able to adjust the slope? Yes, I would. But again, I'm now doing everything in one tool rather than, well, 2 buses and an extra EQ and 2 reverbs and all those extra plugins. Again, one plugin with macro controls is now servicing a lot of these different problems. And that's where I think it's really good. If you have your bass reverb in, say, Logic, and you're using, say, Space Designer, I'm having to do Space Designer on a bus with an EQ afterwards. To then get the stereo effect I want, I'm doing a secondary bus. In my instance, I used RC24, this guy right here, which I've not found a replacement for from Waves yet, which is the Real ADT. Then HEQ to take the mids out and narrow band it and bump up at 2K. And then a compressor to control it all right at the end for the stereo bus. So I'm getting basically the same result, unmasking, able to balance it, put my width control in, all in one tool with macro controls rather than having to dial each individual thing in like I did with the EQ and do the separate stereo to get that to work with the reverb and whatnot. And that seems to be the innovation point we're sitting at now. And the ridiculous thing is, it's $49. I don't know if that's a launch price and if they plan to bump it up. They seem to be really heavily competitive. And for that point, if you haven't got a bunch of other tools and you haven't got this working process, there's very little reason now, if you're working digitally, to go and learn how to achieve the original process that I went and did, when you can do it all inside one tool, because tools are going to get more and more smart, macro control and innovative, and solve a lot of these small issues in a big way in one tool. And that is where I think it is a very useful thing to see in a reverb. That has been my honest review. Thank you very much for watching. And if your music is ready to be released, do check out the channel sponsor and you get a discount off your first year linked below. Take care.